Thanks a lot. To start with where I agree with the deputies in the Rural Independent Group, I agree with the fact that despite years of promises and lip service, the government has consistently failed to effectively tackle the housing crisis, leaving them scrambling to react to a situation that has now spun out of control. With the fact that Ireland's housing crisis is currently the worst in Europe, with rent prices increasing more than any other European country. Those things are unambiguously true. The government's claim in its counter-motion that the government is comprehensively addressing the housing crisis through a suite of actions to accelerate the delivery of new homes while also continuing to deliver on fundamental reforms is unambiguously untrue. The question is why? Why do we have such a huge housing crisis affecting people in rural areas, affecting people in urban areas? What's the root cause of that? In my opinion, the root cause of that is a reliance on the private market to deliver housing and a policy which has seen those at the top, the big landlords, the corporate landlords, the developers, the speculators, the big construction companies, has seen them being able to profit to a huge extent from this housing crisis. Because this isn't just a housing crisis that affects everybody in the same way, it's this terrible natural disaster that we're experiencing. No, for those at the top, this is an enormous opportunity and they have seen profits soar. That's the root cause of the housing crisis, in my opinion, whereas I think the Rural Independent Group motion sees the root cause more as problems in terms of bureaucratic planning, the need to kind of loosen up planning and so on. And I think it's unfortunate that the motion doesn't really address the real causes. It doesn't do anything to address the extortionate cost of development land or construction, because there's nothing in it that might threaten the huge profits being made by landowners, speculators, developers and landlords. And the motion doesn't address the failure of the government to invest in providing secure and affordable public housing accessible to all. One proposal in the motion suggests the introduction of a new €20,000 grant aid package for anyone who wishes to build a permanent one-off house on their own lands. There's no stipulation about any sort of means test. Regardless of how wealthy someone is, they can benefit from this €20,000. There's no stipulation that it needs to be for their own use. And I think that's the reality of that proposal will be simply to put more money into the pockets of the wealthy, as opposed to actually address the housing crisis. According to the latest wealth survey by the CSO, less than 9% of the population own land. I'd say it's significantly higher in this Dáil than in society at large, yet this motion wants to give them all €20,000, including very wealthy landowners in the southern region where the median value of land owned was €433,000, €800 in 2020. What we need is sustainable development of communities, with the state investing to provide affordable homes, be they public homes on a differential rent or genuinely affordable homes. Easy to access services, be that public transport, waste, water infrastructure, etc. We need proper planning by the state to provide sustainable, livable communities for people right across the country. I want to address the government motion, which is basically just a long set of praise for Housing for All and how it's working so wonderfully and all the rest. And the problem that the government has is, of course, that is not people's experience. People do not have the experience that Housing for All is working. If there are some of the hundreds of thousands, over I think 500,000 young people now trapped at home, if there are people who are trying to access the rental market, if there are people who are being threatened with eviction by their landlords, if there are people who are trying to buy their first home when house prices are almost now at a record high, all of those people know, and all their relatives know and their friends know, that Housing for All is definitely not working for them, although some of them will realise that it is working for the big landlords and the developers who back the government and support the government. And the fundamental reason for that is, and the government says every time, no, this is not the case, but it is. At the root of Housing for All, at the root of the government response is reliance on the market. I mean, the government essentially has two ideas to tackle the housing crisis. One is to give money to developers. You can give them the money indirectly through a Help to Buy scheme, which the motion from the Rural Independent Group wants to extend. So the money passes through the hands of private buyers and then into the hands of developers, artificially pushing up the price of houses for the benefit of developers, a scheme that was originally lobbied for by the Construction Industry Federation, or give the money directly by cutting the development levies and all the rest that was announced a couple of weeks ago, giving €1 billion to developers. That's one idea, or the other idea is, okay, we can reduce planning requirements, basically reduce the standards of housing to again increase the potential profits. Whereas the root cause of the housing crisis is the sell-off of the social housing stock, the failure to add to social housing. That's at the base of the entire thing, is that we're completely reliant upon the market in terms of delivering housing. When we make that point, the government at the moment likes to say, well, actually, the state is building more social houses than ever before. And there was a very interesting article about a week ago by Lorcan Sir and Mel Reynolds in the Irish Times, which very, very effectively debunks that claim. They make the point that numerically, yes, this is indeed the highest social housing output since 1975, but the context of a population of 3.2 million in 1975 with a population of 5.1 million means social housing output has actually halved per capita in the intervening period. So even though you've supposedly high figures and so on, the reality in terms of the housing need of the population, it is nowhere close to what is required. But also then when you dig into it deeper, as they do, you see about 70% of what is termed as new build social housing is in reality housing that is turnkey housing bought up from private developers by councils. They point to the vast reliance on AHBs as opposed to the capacity of the councils themselves to build homes, making the point it's the councils who have the land, the councils are in the best position to do it, and yet you have a huge reliance on AHBs, with AHB output up 16 times over the last 7 years. And they go on to make the point that the proposal to abolish development and Irish water levies for housing at an average saving of $12,650 per housing unit is unlikely to deliver housing that is any more affordable for purchasers, but it will inflate the value of residential zoned land by at least 20%. This is welcome if you're a landowner, but not so great if you are a body such as an AHB on whom the state is increasingly reliant, seeking sites on the open market. The government has therefore just made social housing delivery more expensive, while at the same time gifting large landowners significant inflation in their assets' value. It will also be difficult to unwind this bailout in 12 months' time. When the government does the same thing again and again and again, and it benefits a certain class of people, we might think it's not an accident.
Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick.